My name is Elise, and I am 29 years old. The day my mother laughed and said, "You'll never have a house like your sister's." It didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a verdict. Already signed, already sealed, already framed on the wall of our family room like a reminder of where I supposedly belonged. My father nodded along. That nod hurt more than her laughter. It was slow, confident, unquestioning, as if this future had been agreed upon years ago without me ever being invited into the discussion. My sister leaned back in her chair, relaxed, comfortable, wearing that half-smile she always wore when she won something she hadn't earned. "You're jealous, aren't you?" she said. That sentence stayed with me, because envy was easier for them to understand than effort. It was easier to believe I wanted what she had than accept that I was building something of my own. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because I had learned the rules of that house early. Defending dreams there only fed the laughter, and the laughter had teeth, sharp ones. My sister's house was the family trophy. Wide, bright, perfectly landscaped. The kind of place that looked impressive in photos and even better in conversations. The kind of house my parents mentioned to neighbors before they asked how I was doing. At dinner, my mother would casually bring it up. The new cabinets, the view, the neighborhood. My father would nod again, proud in a way that made it clear pride was limited, and most of it had already been allocated. Whenever I tried to talk about my own life, the room tilted back toward her, like gravity itself favored her success. So I stopped trying. I worked long hours. I saved quietly. I learned to keep my plans folded inside me like a map I wouldn't open until I crossed the border alone. Every paycheck went into a future no one else could see. Every late night taught me patience. The truth was, I didn't want a house like my sister. I wanted one that fit me, one built on decisions made when no one was watching. But explaining that felt pointless when the narrative had already been written for me. So I smiled when my sister teased. I swallowed my replies when my father nodded. I watched my mother's laughter ripple through the room, like permission for everyone else to dismiss me. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, I almost believed them. Doubt doesn't arrive loudly, it whispers. Late at night, it asked if maybe they were right, if wanting more without their approval was arrogance, if dreaming quietly was the same as dreaming foolishly. But then I remembered the mornings I left before sunrise, the weekends I declined invitations, the spreadsheets where every dollar was tracked with the seriousness of a promise. Progress doesn't announce itself, it just keeps going. Months passed, then years. The comments never stopped. Sometimes they softened, sometimes they sharpened, but they were always there, a constant reminder of who they thought I was allowed to be. When my sister renovated her kitchen, my mother called me like it was breaking news, as if I'd been waiting for proof that I was behind. When I mentioned being busy with a project, my father asked if it was another phase. My sister laughed again, light, careless, the kind of laugh that assumes it already knows how the story ends. I learned to answer neutrally, to give them nothing they could twist, to keep my milestones private. I didn't tell them about the promotion, the bonus, the meetings with lenders who looked at me like I was serious because I was. I didn't tell them about the neighborhoods I walked through after work, imagining mornings, keys, and silence that belonged only to me. I didn't tell them about the fear either, the real fear that maybe the laughter would be right. But fear, like savings, shrinks when you face it regularly. Then came the night everything shifted. Another family gathering, compliments aimed elsewhere, jokes that landed on me. And my sister said it again, smiling like she always did. "You're jealous, aren't you?" My mother laughed first, my father nodded. And something settled inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. I invited my sister over for tea. My voice was calm, steady enough to surprise even me. She agreed with a smirk, probably imagining another comparison, another room where she'd automatically feel superior. I said nothing more. I didn't defend myself. I didn't hint. I didn't promise anything. I had learned that some truths don't need arguments, they need timing. When she arrived, her voice rang through the house, sharp and startled. "Hey, Mom, you have to see this right now." I stood quietly, holding 2 cups of tea, listening to her voice echo off the walls. The walls they all said I would never have. Time folded in on itself, every laugh, every nod, every "you'll never have a house like your sister's," lining up to witness what none of them had bothered to imagine. My sister walked slowly at first, then faster, opening doors, touching surfaces, looking out windows like the place might disappear if she stared too long. I could almost hear her thoughts, scrambling to rewrite the story she had rehearsed for years. When my parents arrived, my mother's smile froze halfway. The same mouth that had laughed now, unsure what expression to choose. My father stood still, silent, his nod finally gone. My sister tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. The truth was heavy in the air, and it didn't care how she said anything. They took it all in. The open living room, the light I had chosen, the calm confidence of a space built without their approval. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. Real success isn't loud. It just stands there and waits. My mother cleared her throat first. She always did when something challenged the version of reality she was comfortable with. She said it was nice. Said the word the same way she used to say it about my sister's place, but this time it sounded borrowed, like she was trying it on to see if it fit. I noticed her eyes moving, measuring, not comparing anymore, just trying to understand. That shift mattered. My father finally spoke. His voice was careful. "How did you manage this?" The question felt strange after years of assumptions, as if the answer hadn't been sitting right in front of him the whole time. I didn't give him a speech. I didn't list sacrifices. I just said the truth. Work, patience, discipline, and not letting laughter decide my limits. My sister circled the kitchen again, slower now, quieter. She ran her fingers along the counter and said, softer than I'd ever heard her, "I didn't know you were doing all this." People confuse silence with stagnation. They mistake privacy for failure. I had learned that lesson the long way. I poured the tea and set the cups down. The simple clink echoed louder than applause. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. The space was doing that for me. While they were comparing houses, I was building one. While they were laughing, I was saving. While they were nodding, I was learning. My mother said, almost to herself, "I guess we were wrong." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was a crack in the old script, and sometimes that's all it takes for light to get in. My sister looked at me then, really looked, without the smirk, without the tease, without the need to win. "It's beautiful," she said. I believed her, not because the words mattered, but because the balance had shifted back where it belonged. I didn't repeat their old lines back to them. I didn't replay the laughter. Those words hovered like ghosts that no longer fit the room. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. He nodded again, but this time it wasn't agreement with judgment. It was recognition, and that difference felt heavier than any apology could have. After the door closed, I walked through the house alone. I touched the walls. I breathed in the quiet. I let the weight of it settle the way earned things do. But the story wasn't finished. Because proving people wrong is only one part of the journey. The real test comes after, when circumstances shift, and the same people who doubted you suddenly need what you quietly built. And that moment was closer than any of us realized. A few weeks later, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't laughter on the other end. It was hesitation. My mother spoke first, carefully, like she was stepping onto unfamiliar ground. She said there was an issue, something about paperwork, something about property boundaries and signatures that didn't line up the way they were supposed to. It was my sister's house. A dispute had surfaced, old documents, conflicting claims, a situation that couldn't be solved with smiles or comparisons. It needed attention, organization, calm thinking. And suddenly, the family needed me. Not as the quiet one, not as the jealous one, but as the person who knew how to read details without rushing past them. I went with them to meetings. I listened while others spoke emotionally. I noticed what they missed, dates that didn't match, clauses that had been skimmed over because no one thought they'd matter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind anyone of what they used to say. I didn't have to. Reality was already correcting the record. My sister sat beside me in those meetings, quieter than usual. The confidence she once borrowed from comparison had nowhere to stand now. For the first time, she wasn't ahead. She was just another person hoping things would work out. My father watched me differently, not proudly, not skeptically, but attentively, as if he was realizing that capability doesn't always announce itself. The process took time. Weeks turned into months. Documents moved. Decisions were made. The issue resolved cleanly, legally, without drama. When it was over, my sister thanked me, not casually, not automatically, she meant it. Something in the family shifted again after that. Conversations changed, not dramatically, subtly, the way real change always happens. My mother stopped comparing. My father stopped nodding on my behalf, and my sister stopped assuming the ending. But the most important change wasn't theirs. It was mine. I no longer waited for recognition. I no longer needed to prove anything. I had learned something deeper than revenge or validation. Silence, when paired with consistency, becomes authority. And authority doesn't need permission. Still, life wasn't done testing that lesson, because just when things settle, they have a way of asking one final question. And mine came sooner than expected. The final test didn't arrive loudly. It never does. It came disguised as opportunity. One evening, my father asked if we could talk, just the two of us. That alone told me something had changed. He had never asked before. He had only assumed. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table my sister had once walked around in disbelief. He folded his hands, unfolded them, then finally said it. He said he was thinking about the future, about assets, about fairness. He said words he had never used in the same sentence before. Independent, responsible, reliable. He told me he wanted my help structuring things properly, legally, cleanly, no confusion, no disputes later. He wanted to make sure everything was documented, protected, and handled the right way. What he was really saying was this. He trusted me. Not emotionally, not conditionally, legally. And that was bigger than any apology. I didn't rush to answer. I asked questions instead, the same way I had learned to, calmly, precisely. I explained what should be done, what shouldn't, and why clarity mattered more than comfort. For the first time, he listened without nodding ahead of me. He waited. Later, my mother called. Her voice was softer now, less certain. She said she admired how I handled things. She said she hadn't realized how much strength could exist without noise. My sister didn't say much at all. She didn't need to. She had learned the same lesson the hard way. Comparison is a fragile advantage. It breaks the moment the other person stops playing. Months passed. Everything was finalized, properly, fairly, legally sound. No favoritism hidden behind smiles, no assumptions left undocumented. And when it was done, there was no announcement, no celebration. Just peace. I realized then that justice doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like quiet authority standing exactly where doubt used to be. I walked through my house again that night. The same walls, the same quiet, but something was different. I wasn't just living in a space I owned. I was standing in a position I had earned. No one laughed anymore. No one nodded over me. No one asked if I was jealous. The story they once told about me no longer existed, because I had replaced it with evidence. And that is the kind of ending that doesn't need applause to feel complete. But even after everything was settled, after the documents were signed and the assumptions buried, I realized something quietly unsettling. Closure doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers. The first layer was silence, the kind where no one questioned my choices anymore, no comparisons, No jokes disguised as concern, just absence. And absence, I learned, can feel heavier than conflict. The second layer came when extended family started noticing. At gatherings, people asked me questions directly now, about work, about plans, about how I managed things on my own, not in awe, not in disbelief, just matter-of-fact curiosity. My sister noticed too. One evening, she showed up unannounced. No parents, no audience, just her. She stood at the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. Her confidence wasn't gone, but it was quieter, more honest. "I didn't mean to make you feel small," she said suddenly. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't cover everything, but it wasn't nothing. I nodded, not to forgive instantly, not to reopen wounds, just to acknowledge the effort. We sat in the living room, the same room that had once rewritten our family's hierarchy without saying a word. She looked around and smiled faintly. "You know," she said, "I always thought winning meant being seen first." I didn't respond right away. "Turns out," she continued, "you don't need an audience to be ahead." That was new, and I respected it. After she left, I sat alone again, thinking about how strange power really is, how it moves, how it changes hands without ceremony. I hadn't taken anything from anyone. I had simply stopped shrinking. And that made all the difference. But life still had one last moment waiting, one final mirror, not for them. For me. Because proving people wrong is satisfying, but outgrowing the need to do so is something else entirely. And I was just beginning to understand that. That realization didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, on an ordinary morning. I was standing by the window, coffee in hand, watching sunlight stretch across the floor I had chosen, paid for, waited for. And for the first time, my thoughts weren't about them. Not my mother's laughter, not my father's nods, not my sister's smile. They simply didn't enter the room. That's when I understood the last shift had happened, without asking my permission. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't proving. I wasn't measuring my life against a past version of myself that had been underestimated. I was just living. Later that week, a conversation came up that would have once shaken me. A relative said, casually, "You really surprised everyone." I smiled politely, but inside, something corrected itself. I hadn't surprised anyone. They had underestimated me. There's a difference. Surprise fades. Underestimation leaves evidence. At another gathering, my sister was asked for advice about property investments. She redirected the question to me without hesitation. No jokes, no edge, just trust. My parents noticed. They didn't comment. They didn't need to. Recognition had already taken root. And here's the part no one talks about. Winning doesn't feel like triumph when you're done chasing validation. It feels like relief, like setting down a weight you didn't realize you were still carrying. I thought back to that younger version of myself, sitting quietly while laughter decided her limits, swallowing words, folding dreams smaller so they wouldn't be mocked. I wished I could tell her something. That silence is not weakness when it's chosen. That patience is not delay when it's strategic. That the loudest people in the room are rarely the ones in control. And most importantly, that justice doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from structure, from preparation, from being so solid that no one can argue with the outcome. That's legal justice. That's smart domination. Not overpowering others, but standing so firmly in your place that no one can push you out of it. I looked around my house once more, not with pride, not with defiance, but with calm certainty. This wasn't just a home. It was proof. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Enough but not finished. Because proof changes more than perception. It changes expectations. People began to expect things from me now, not favors, not sympathy, competence, stability, solutions. The kind of expectations that only appear when doubt has nowhere left to hide. One afternoon, a call came from a lawyer. Routine follow-up, they said, just making sure everything was aligned for the future. Titles clean, records clear, no loose ends. I listened carefully, asked precise questions, confirmed details. When the call ended, I realized something quietly powerful. Nothing in my life depended on anyone's approval anymore. Not legally. Not financially. Not emotionally. That was the real turning point. My sister felt it too. One evening, she admitted something she had never said out loud. She said she had always assumed she'd be ahead simply because she started louder. She thought visibility was the same as security. It isn't, she said, not bitterly, honestly. I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. Experience already had. My parents adjusted in their own ways. My mother stopped narrating family stories around a single success. My father stopped nodding out of habit and started listening out of respect. No one announced these changes. They unfolded naturally, the way real consequences do. And that's when I understood the final lesson this journey was teaching me. Domination isn't about winning arguments. It's about removing the need for them. I had done that without confrontation, without speeches, without demanding recognition. I let time, consistency, and structure do the work. That's the kind of justice that lasts, the kind that can't be undone by laughter or dismissed by a nod. I wasn't ahead of anyone. I was simply unmovable. And when you reach that point, the story doesn't end loudly. It settles. But there was still one chapter left to be written. Not for them. For the people listening who are still standing where I once stood, holding their plans quietly, being laughed at for dreams they haven't revealed yet. That chapter was coming. And it mattered. I didn't plan to become an example. I never wanted that role. All I wanted was space. Space to think without being judged. Space to build without being watched. Space to fail privately if I had to. But life has a way of turning quiet persistence into something visible. One day, a younger cousin pulled me aside. She spoke in a low voice, the way people do when they're afraid of being overheard by doubt itself. She said she was tired of being compared, tired of being told what she couldn't do, tired of feeling small in rooms that were supposed to feel like family. I listened. I didn't give her advice right away. I didn't need to. I told her my story not as a victory but as a process. I told her about the laughter, the nods, the years of silence, the discipline no one applauded. And I watched something change in her eyes. Not hope, not excitement. Permission. That's when it hit me. The real impact of what I'd done wasn't the house. It wasn't the legal clarity. It wasn't even the shift in my family. It was the quiet permission it gave others to stop waiting. I started noticing it everywhere. Small changes, different questions, people asking how to prepare instead of how to impress, how to protect instead of how to show off. My sister noticed it too. She said something once that stayed with me. She said, "You didn't just change how they see you, you changed the rules." That was true. The old rule was loud wins, quiet waits. I broke that without ever announcing it. And here's the part that matters most. I didn't win by taking anything from anyone. I didn't win by embarrassing them. I didn't win by throwing their words back at them. I won by outgrowing the space they tried to keep me in. That's smart domination. That's legal justice. That's the kind of ending no one can appeal. But the story still isn't done. Because somewhere right now, someone is being laughed at. Someone is being underestimated. Someone is folding their plans small so they won't be mocked. And whether they know it yet or not, they're standing exactly where I once stood. At the beginning. At the beginning feels lonely. It always does. People think beginnings are loud, full of motivation and speeches. They're not. They're quiet, awkward, full of unanswered questions, full of nights where you wonder if silence means failure. I knew that place well. There were evenings I sat alone, staring at numbers that barely moved. Days when progress felt imaginary. Moments when I replayed my mother's laughter in my head and asked myself if I was being foolish for continuing. No one talks about that part. The part where belief has to exist without witnesses. That's where most people quit. Not because they aren't capable, but because they want confirmation too early. They want applause before proof, approval before structure. I didn't have either, so I learned to replace them. I replaced approval with discipline. I replaced applause with consistency. I replaced validation with documentation. Every decision I made was quiet, deliberate, and boring by design, because boring doesn't break under pressure. Drama does. Slowly, without ceremony, my life became solid. No shortcuts, no luck disguised as talent, just layers built one at a time, each strong enough to carry the next. That solidity is what protected me later, in rooms with lawyers, in conversations with family, in moments where emotion could have ruined everything if I hadn't learned control first. That's the part people miss when they see the result. They see the house. They see the respect. They see the shift. They don't see the years of being underestimated that trained me to be unshakable. And here's the truth I didn't understand back then. Being underestimated is not a disadvantage if you know how to use it. It gives you space. It gives you time. It gives you freedom to build without interference. While others are busy defending their image, you're free to strengthen your foundation. That's why, when the moment finally arrives, it doesn't feel explosive. It feels inevitable. And inevitability is the strongest position anyone can stand in. The story wasn't about a house. It never was. It was about becoming someone whose presence settles rooms instead of competing in them. Someone whose silence carries weight. Someone whose success doesn't need witnesses to remain real. That's what I became. And that is the kind of ending no laughter can undo. And yet, even after all of that, there was one final realization waiting for me. One that didn't come from family or documents or even success. It came from myself. One evening, I was sorting through old files on my laptop. Budgets, plans, early drafts of goals I had written years ago, back when everything still felt uncertain. I read the words slowly and almost smiled. Not because I had achieved everything, but because I recognized the person who wrote them. She wasn't confident, she wasn't validated, she wasn't supported, but she was determined, quietly, relentlessly. That version of me had trusted the process without knowing the outcome. She had chosen patience when reaction would have been easier. She had chosen preparation when proving people wrong would have been tempting. And that choice had shaped everything. I realized then that the real victory wasn't changing how my family saw me. It was changing how I saw myself. I no longer flinched at doubt. I no longer rushed to explain my choices. I no longer felt the need to be understood immediately. Because I understood myself. That's the moment domination becomes complete. Not when others accept you, but when their acceptance is no longer required for you to stand tall. Justice doesn't always mean someone admitting they were wrong. Sometimes justice is simply living so well, so solidly, so independently, that the past loses its grip on you entirely. No more rehearsing old conversations. No more replaying laughter. No more waiting for nods. Just forward motion. Calm, controlled, unstoppable. And that's when I knew the ending was close. Not because there was nothing left to prove, but because there was nothing left to carry. The weight was gone, and what remained was freedom. Freedom changes the way you move through the world. I noticed it in small things first. The way I walked into rooms without rehearsing what I'd say. The way opinions no longer felt like verdicts. The way my decisions didn't need a second opinion to feel valid. I had stopped bracing myself. That's when life offered one last mirror, subtle but precise. An old neighbor ran into me one afternoon. Someone who had known our family for years. Someone who had heard the stories before they ever met me. They smiled and said, "Your parents must be so proud now." Now. The word hung there for a moment. I smiled back politely, but inside, something settled permanently. Pride that arrives after proof is appreciation, not belief. And that was okay. Because belief was no longer something I was waiting to receive. It was something I carried. Later that night, I thought about how easily narratives form around people who stay quiet, how confidently others fill in the blanks when you don't speak up, and how dangerous it is to mistake those narratives for truth. I had lived inside one for years. The jealous sister. The unrealistic one. The supporting character. None of it had been true. It had just gone unchallenged. Until evidence arrived. That's the part people misunderstand. Evidence doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it doesn't explain. It simply exists. And once it does, the old story collapses under its own weight.